So just how ridiculous is it that the Lions are favored over the Vikings? Let's talk about it. Let's talk out our feelings about it. Plus, bets and bold predictions on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome in to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. You can also find the show on Amazon Fire or Roku. Just get the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. You can get all Minnesota sports Locked On shows, Locked On Minnesota, Locked On Wolves, Twins, Wild, and of course this show, Gophers too. On today's show, I want to talk to you about the sort of topic, I guess, that's dominating the week, which is like, why, oh, why are the Lions favored? And I think I have some understanding, but the betting line stuff has been wonky. But I also want to talk about some prop bets like we do every week, as well as your bold predictions, which is always the most fun way to wrap out the week. First, let's talk about that line. So as I look at it right now at BetOnline, the Vikings are 2-point underdogs at the Lions. Now, home field advantage, conventional wisdom for a long time was that home field advantage was worth 3 points. So it would mean that like the Vikings are 1-point favorites on a neutral field, but because it's the road, they'll say that. That's not really the case anymore. Home field advantage was potentially overstated for a long time, and now it's kind of more like 1.5 points is what home field advantage is. So it's hovered. And depending on what book you're at, too, you could see BetOnline has it as 2. But you could kind of say that the books think that the Vikings and Lions on a neutral field are very close to about the same team. But here's what's really, really weird. It wasn't that way all week. And the way that this line has evolved over the week should tell you that I don't think the betting markets are very sure about this. Because it started, at least on BetOnline, it opened with the Vikings as 1-point favorites. And then bettors slammed that really hard, and like 98% of the money was on the Lions there. And then it went all the way to 2.5 Vikings, and then the bettors slammed that really hard, or 2.5 Lions favorite. And bettors slammed that really hard, bet the Vikings and the money line a whole bunch really hard. And then it's sort of settled into this sort of middle ground at -2 or -1.5, depending on where you see it. And so it kind of tells me that Vegas has been kind of all over, and the public has this idea that the Vikings and Lions are very similar teams, and if the line went too far one way or another, they were going to hammer it. The point I want to make here, though, is I think a lot of this is driven by like public perception, right? For me, the betting line is a really good proxy for public perception. What does the public actually think of these? And it helps me too when I'm like, man, the national media isn't giving the Vikings any credit. And then if they're like favored by 3 against the Jets, which are a possible playoff team, I'm like, okay, maybe they are giving some credit. But here it's like, wow, the public really doesn't like the Vikings here to have them up with a 5-win team. That's like almost historic. That's only happened like 1 or 2 times like ever where an 800 team, a 10-2 team or equivalent has been an underdog against a 5-7 team or equivalent this late in the season, right? Unless you want to talk about like 2-1 versus 0-3 teams, and we have a lot of priors or something like that. So what is going on? Look, if you want to look at the advanced stats and DVOA and stuff, you'll actually see an argument. Will Ragatz wrote an article about that on SI, that in terms of like production metrics that can be more predictive, that the Lions have basically gone toe-to-toe with the Vikings over this season, and it's just that the Vikings have been winning their close games, which I've sort of argued, like, yeah, they've won their close games. They should be given credit for that, even though we all kind of understand that if the Vikings have 5 more close games, we don't expect them to go 5-0, right? Like, we understand that, but winning those close games is still like, you know, they made good plays in the clutch, they did situational masters and stuff, they should be credited for that. That's the way I feel about it. But I also think that these two teams are victims of expectations in a sense. The Vikings had very middling expectations headed into the season, right? I think I called them 7-10. Their betting line was like 8.5, 9, depending on where you got it, and they've crushed those expectations. And so that begets new expectations, where now, okay, you're 10-2. Well, how are you stacking up to other teams that were 10-2? Like the 1998 Falcons who went to the Super Bowl, right? Or to use a Vikings team, the 2000 Vikings are around there. And in terms of like DVOA, they don't even stack up to most 9-3 teams. So, look how fake they are and everything. Here's the way I see it with the like 9-0 and one score games thing, because some of those one score games are like 8-point games where there was a garbage time touchdown. And it's like, all right, calling that like a coin flip. They just got lucky to win like against like Miami. That game was over halfway through the fourth quarter. Like it was garbage time. But then there are games that were genuinely felt like they could have really flipped either way if you change one bounce. Like the Bills game, or I would say the Commanders game too. So there's some of those. There are 4 games where the Vikings win probability never dipped below 40%. And in most of those games, it didn't dip below 50 for very long. There was like maybe one moment where it looked kind of dicey and then popped right back up. So there were games like against Miami, Arizona, Chicago, and even the London game that were, from like a game script perspective, pretty clean wins. And it was pretty clear, okay, there is one team that's better and one team that's worse. And yeah, there were exciting moments at the end of it, but look at what those games came down to. You know, they came down to a 62-yard field goal, right? And yeah, double doinked. He almost made it, good for him, but 62-yard field goal is not a high probability thing. That's New Orleans. If you look at Chicago, they were down 8. They needed to go down and score and win in overtime. I mean, in terms of win probability, in terms of how many times, how sustainable is it to win a game if you're going to be up by 8 with the other team driving every time? It's actually kind of sustainable because it's really hard to score and get the 2 and win in overtime. That's a lot of things. Just the 2-point and the overtime, you could argue, are coin flips, let alone having to actually have a touchdown drive. And so some of those wins are a little bit more realistic. I would say right now, if I were to try to gauge out what kind of team the Vikings really are, no, 10-2 probably overstates it. They're probably more like an 8-4 team. Like, I don't think it's that much of it. I don't think it's an insane difference where they should be on the same level as a 5-7 team. But the Lions are at home, and I get it. And the Lions are surging. They've won 4 out of their last 5 as well. So I get it. But here's what I'll say. The betting market doesn't seem very certain on this. The betting market is also comprised of the public, which is reacting to that suddenly new and heightened expectation. And they might be saying, yeah, you're a 10-2 team and you don't look like one, so I think you're worse than you are. And the Lions, who seem to have found themselves, are 5-7, but right now they're playing like a 4-1 team, right? And that's what's recent. That's what's in our heads. And so we're going to treat you like you're a little bit better, right? And because the Lions had no expectations in this season, they were 1-4 and everybody wrote them off. A lot of people wrote them off before the season, honestly. And the fact that they're playing well enough to barely scratch their way into the in the hunt graphic is telling people, hey, maybe they're like real. Ooh, this is going to be something. So the betting market is, I think, overcorrecting for those things. So that's going to be my explanation for it. Now, you can make a genuine argument that right now, in their current state, the Lions, with their high-flying offense, despite having the worst defense in the league, are just about as good as the Vikings, and they're at home, so they should be favored. And you wouldn't be that far off the betting market that basically thinks, most of the line right now is comprised of home field advantage. And then they're saying the Vikings or the Lions are like a half point better than the Vikings, which is margin of error. But here's what I will say. Bulletin board material. Go kick the crap out of them. The Vikings can clinch the division. They can be wearing baseball caps after this game if they win it. I know that they're going to kind of downplay it and they're going to say like maybe that no, we're just trying to be 1-0 every week, but it's in their heads. So go kick the crap out of somebody. Go take a division rival that you have owned for the better part of a decade and kick the crap out of them. This weird hope that the Lions have right now, this like sort of long shot idea that maybe they could sneak into a wild card game and make some noise because they're good now. Nah, make it the same old Lions, go kill them in their own house and go celebrate a division win in the stadium of a division opponent. That's what I want to see here. Even though they don't need to by any stretch of the imagination, I want to see it happen. I don't know if we're going to see that happen, though, because I do have respect for the Lions in the way that they are comprised right now. I don't have respect for the Lions in their history, and nor should you. But the way that they're comprised right now is a team that absolutely can go win a game, right? So let's talk about what I think will happen. And to do that, we'll talk about bets and, of course, your bold predictions. But First, this episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by BetterHelp Therapy Online. Therapy is important, and it's not just for people who are like having a crisis or who have some like emotional thing that they can't get. I think for a lot of people, especially if you're in the generation above me, think of therapy as this sign of weakness. That's this thing that you shouldn't need. And I'm especially talking to you fellas. But it's not like that. To me, it's like going to the gym, but for your mental health. It's an active maintenance, and it's a way to discover a better version of yourself. You know, you wouldn't say that like real men don't need to go to the gym to get fit, right? And I don't think you should say that real men, you know, don't need therapy to be the best version of themselves emotionally, right? The thing about therapy is, you got to find the right person, and that can be a huge hassle. So try a lot of people. Like if you don't click with a therapist, try a different therapist. You'd be surprised how different they are. And BetterHelp has a lot of tools that can help you match with somebody who's right for you and exactly what you need out of therapy, because it's going to be different for everybody, and that's going to be valid for everybody. If you just want to do this over the phone or just over video chat, or if you do want the like classic in-office experience, all of that is available to you, and all of that's totally fine. So get unstuck with BetterHelp. Learn more and save 10% off of your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's betterhelp.com/lockedon. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. They'll be talking about everything World Cup, whatever happens on Thursday Night Football. I'm recording this before that. And anything else going on in the wide world of sports. Also, check me out on Patreon if you would like some more in-depth film breakdown things. That's patreon.com/Luke Braun NFL. Let's get into some grambles with the You Betcha segment of this of Locked On Vikings, brought to you by Bet Online, where the game starts, and all these lines are provided by Bet Online. It will not surprise you to learn that I'm pretty bullish on both offenses in this one. So you could argue that this game features the two worst defenses passing-wise in the league. The Vikings passing defense has been a horror show. Again, check me out on Patreon if you want an explanation of why, but it's a lot of big mistakes and a lot of really unacceptable plays from even veteran players, but also, you know, a lot of Duke Shelley got beat, right? Caleb Evans got beat. But that's a problem, and we don't know if we're going to see Cam Dantzler. It might be a push, but it might be Duke Shelley for another game. I should also mention that the Vikings have a flu outbreak. I think it's the flu. It's not confirmed to be the flu. All we know is that it's not COVID. So some illness that has knocked out Patrick Peterson, Harrison Smith, Danielle Hunter. I mean, it's like horrifying. So that is something to watch as the week goes on. A few of those players did practice on Thursday. We'll see if they practice Friday. And then they, of course, have all of Saturday to get healthy as well. So the hope is that that's just one of those, 48-hour things that doesn't actually hurt them. But it does kind of screw up their week of practice, which will be another thing that may lead to the Lions hitting some overs. So the bet I really like here that you can find on Bet Online is both teams over 24.5. It's a yes or no bet. Yes is plus 200. So that is, you can think of that as 3-1 odds that both teams will be over 24.5 points in this one. I really struggle to see a world where either of these defenses keep the other offense under 24.5. The Lions offense has been absolutely cooking, and their defense has been a catastrophe. The Vikings defense has been a catastrophe, and the Vikings offense just got done with an absolutely eye-popping gauntlet of defenses, going all the way back to the Commanders game, which is a very good defense. The Bills, a very revered defense. The Cowboys, a very good defense. Patriots, maybe the best defense in the league. And the Jets, a very hyped up defense. That is a huge gauntlet, and they held their own against all of those, if not having like genuinely good games against those teams. Now they're facing one of the worst defenses in the world, and I think they're going to be able to put up a ton of points. I think this is going to absolutely be this kind of track meet, and I don't think anybody's going to argue with you there, right? So both teams over 24.5, and you can get 3-1 odds on that. I love it. It is the TJ Hawkinson revenge game. So I got to have a TJ Hawkinson one. He's plus 190 to get a touchdown. I think TJ Hawkinson touchdown in Ford Field just feels a little too perfect. So I'm going to put a little bit on that. And that's, again, it's not quite, but almost a 3-1 bet. So yeah, it's something you kind of put a half unit as a flyer on. But I'm putting it on there. I love plus 190 Hawkinson TD. By the way, by the time you get to this, the lines may shift and move, and be taken down and put back up and stuff. It's just how these books work. So be patient. You might find a different line, but that's just what I'm looking at right now as I record this. Also taking Justin Jefferson over 6.5 receptions. So the way I see this game going down is different than the way that week 3 went down. If the Lions have a lot of regrets about that game. Like Dan Campbell regrets the way he called that 1 4th down at the end of the game, and he talks about it a ton. But I also think that they have a regret about how much they sold out to stop Justin Jefferson. Now, you can go all the way back to my Wednesday episode week after week 3 to talk about how the Lions approached Justin Jefferson and how they got him. They held him to 14 yards. That is not because the Lions have some secret sauce. It is because they sold out. They had a safety over the top of him at all times, and they had the other safety watching him over the other side. If he ever crossed the field, the other safety would pick him up. So the corner basically only had to play press and trail him, which means you could actually get beat off the line and it would be totally fine because you have 2 safeties covering all your bases. So just put a YOLO arm into him, right? Like just the most aggressive jam you can get, jam the heck out of him, and it's like a functional triple team. But that left everybody else one-on-one, and it led to a whole bunch of Amani or Oruwariye just couldn't hang with Adam Thielen without holding. That's really what happened there. And it was pretty clear that he was coached to just try to get away with holding instead of trying to stop his grabbiness because he was doing it every play. And he got called for it a whole bunch, probably could have got called more. And I'm not just saying that. Apparently, Wes Phillips said that they sent some of those plays to the league later, and they said, yeah, this could have got called more. So the league officiating office agrees too that holding could have been called more. I don't think that that's a way to win the game, and it wasn't a way to win the game because holding penalties ended up converting key moments for the Vikings. And I don't think the Lions should run that strategy back. I kind of would love it if they did, but I'm going to give them the credit and say that they're a little bit smarter than that Aaron Glenn is smarter than that, and that they're going to try to approach Justin Jefferson a different way. And considering what he did when he was one-on-one with DJ Reed and Sauce Gardner, 2 very good cornerbacks, and I'll give that to Jeff Okudah as well, he was open, man, and there were problems with pressure, and Kirk Cousins was getting beat up, and there were some missed throws and stuff. So he didn't get the production that it looks like, but I promise you, he was open a ton against the Jets, and the Lions secondary pales in comparison to that really, really standout Jets secondary. So do we do yards, receptions, whatever? My favorite line is Justin Jefferson over 6.5 receptions. Just feels like they're going to be able to get the ball to him a lot, but you could go yards, you could go touchdown. Touchdown was plus 100 last I looked at it. I liked 6.5 receptions at minus 115, Justin Jefferson. And then the last one I've got here is one for the Lions because I also do think the Lions will do very well offensively. Amon-Ra St. Brown over 81.5. Now you might think, wait, Jameson Williams is coming back. But so talking to Matt Derry and even asking like Ron Johnson on the Minnesota Football Party, I kind of get the same vibe from everybody who's looked into this, which is that Jameson Williams is going to be a deep threat, and he's going to be kind of folded in slowly. And because of what Amon-Ra St. Brown has shown, he is going to be wide receiver 1. It's not going to suddenly be that he takes on a role like as a role player and Jameson Williams becomes the 1A guy. That may happen eventually, but it's not going to be plan A. It's going to be something that Jameson Williams kind of has to earn organically. For that reason, I think Amon-Ra St. Brown gets a lot of volume, and I think if he's getting a lot of looks and a lot of targets, he's going to convert some of them because the Vikings defense can't find its ass. So Amon-Ra St. Brown over 81.5 yards. Hope I'm wrong on that one, but those are the bets that I am going to do. We also have your bold predictions coming up. So definitely don't touch that dial, those of you listening on an iPod shuffle. Because today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. It's a kind of an alternative to the classic Grambling. It is daily fantasy, but it's made a little easier than your classic daily fantasy because it's just you against the house. You're not putting in a big pool with 600,000 people. It's just you against the house, and it's just a Prize Picks projection. Can you beat it? They say Justin Jefferson will have, 942 yards, and you can say, nah, he's going to get more than that. And that's all Prize Picks is. They have projections on any sport that you watch, from the NFL to the NBA, NHL, NASCAR, WNBA, esports, tennis, cricket, whatever. So Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less at prizepicks.com or on the Prize Picks app. You can sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users also can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, that means Prize Picks gives you $100 right on top of it. Deposit 50, get 50, and so on. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. It is time to get bold. I hate it every time. It's bold prediction time. This is your boldest, craziest predictions, and I'm going to read them off. And if you're right, we party. But first, we got to talk about the bold predictions you guys gave me for last week. None of them hit, which I was getting a little nervous for a while because you guys were getting way too good at this. We've got a couple weeks off now with nobody hitting a bold prediction, and that's the way it should be. They should be too bold to hit. Ingram's left foot said that Mike White would put up a 4 passing touchdown day in a losing effort and would stress the hell out of Vikings faithful. He did stress the hell out of Vikings faithful, but not on a 4 passing touchdown day. I do not believe he hit any passing touchdowns. I think he just had the one QB sneak, was the only touchdown the Jets got all day. Josh said that Brian O'Neill would finally catch a touchdown pass. I'm glad we snuck that one in there somewhere, but it will never happen until the Vikings wake up and hear the good word. Ryan Gunn said that the game would go to overtime and that KJ Wright would house a wide receiver screen pass, just like the last time the Jets came to Minnesota. No overtime, thankfully. I don't know if my heart could take that, especially because I was watching that game. I was sick. Dried Up Monpont said that in the 2010 preseason, Kevin O'Connell had 70 passing yards, 7 rushing yards, and 2 picks as the Jets quarterback in 2 games, and that Kirk would have a worse stat line. In spirit, you had it. It was definitely not one of the best games for Kirk statistically, for sure. I don't even think he got past like $180, like past 200 yards, but certainly not worse than 70 and 2 picks. And Adam Kleinsaucer, I would assume no relation, says that Mike White's first pass attempt would be a pick 6. So his third pass attempt was a pick. It was the tipped interception Cam Bynum forced and Harrison Smith came down with. But it was his third attempt, and it was not a pick 6. It was just a regular pick. But you got there in spirit. A very early pick. That was a good call. I'll give you credit for it. And Tony Trout says that the Vikings would score on each of their first 5 drives. They did score on their first one because it was an interception in field goal range, but then they punted on drive 2, so that one died. Let's move on to this week's bold predictions. First one I'm taking comes from Kyle Barker. Thank you all so much for all of your submissions, by the way. I got so many, and I love them all, and I love you all. Each team, says Kyle Barker, will have a touchdown scored by a player from Minnesota State Mankato. So you're essentially parlaying an Adam Thielen touchdown and a Shane Zylstra touchdown. Those are the 2 Minnesota State Mankato players on each team, respectively. That is about as unbold as I'll let it get because you're just parlaying 2 players, but I do like the Minnesota State Mankato connection, so we'll let it happen. Chris Smith says that the Vikings will get a safety without tackling or sacking a Lions player. I absolutely love this one. There is always, since I was a kid, there is always, every Lions game has some, I call it the Lionsing. There's always something that is just some mind-boggling mistake that that makes you say only the Lions. I feel like a holding penalty in the end zone could be the Lionsing of this week. I love it. Observant Idiocy says that Joseph finally hits a 56-yarder, but misses yet another extra point. I'll give you 56 plus. It doesn't need to be exact, but yet misses another extra point. And any field goal under 30, I would any field goal in the 20s or below, like Blair Walshing it, I would also give you. Because I see what you're getting at. He hits the hard one, but misses the easy one. But it needs to go to enough of an extreme to be considered bold by the standards of this segment. Joshua Lampa says that the Vikings and Lions both gained their fewest amount of yards up to this point. Okay, I have a couple of them like this in here because this is these are the worst defenses in the league. There are a couple that are kind of going the opposite, so that both of these teams have season lows in terms of yardage gained. So that would be under 254. That was the worst that the Lions did. Hilariously, they won that game. That was the Packers game where Aaron Rodgers threw 3 interceptions, but that was their worst output, their worst offensive output yardage wise. And then for the Vikings, that would be 183, which was the Cowboys game. So they would have to get under 183. That is quite the parlay. Very bold. Love the energy. And then a similar one from Lorenzo, who says, truth be told, only thing that yardage is good for is fantasy football and the Pro Bowl, which are both irrelevant. Main thing that matters is wins and losses. So first off, Cook, hell yeah. And he says that the Vikings win by not giving up any touchdowns, under 0.5 touchdowns for the Lions, for Lorenzo. And I'm counting defensive, special teams, all kinds of things. Lions do not see the end zone. That's how this one has to hit. Finally, Skolator says late Q4, Lions behind, but it's close. In the waning seconds with a chance to pull ahead, Detroit instead gives Minnesota a defensive touchdown. Minnesota breaks its streak of single-score wins on the play, and the game violates the letter of the one-score victories narrative, but not the spirit of it. So that's a very specific situation. I don't need that specific situation to come to pass. I am holding you to the last sentence. The game violates the letter of the one-score victories narrative, but not the spirit of it. So they win by 2 scores, but it feels very bad. That's the way I have to do it. And we will circle back to this next Friday and see if we actually did it. We'll see how the discourse goes over the week and stuff if we are close on this. And we'll have a little discussion on if it hits or not. But I do remain judge, jury, and executioner. If any of those are right, we'll party. And it's only going to get weirder. I'll see you guys all on Monday. We'll talk about whatever happens in this Lions game, whatever it is. Remember, the stakes are low. The Vikings are basically locked into one of like 2 or 3 positions in the NFC right now. So right now, it's about getting right. It's about finding yourself. It's about getting healthy and staying healthy. That's what we need to be rooting for here. But of course, I want to go into the Lions' house and go take the division in front of their faces. That would make me feel very good. I will see you on Monday. Check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. Check out my Patreon, patreon.com/Luke Braun, NFL. And as always, Skol.